The rain poured down in heavy sheets, drenching the streets of Ashford City. Emma pulled her thin sweater tighter around her body, shivering as she hurried toward her small rented room after a long shift at the cafe. The city never truly slept. Cars honked, vendors shouted, and distant laughter filled the air. But tonight, all Emma could hear was the thunder rumbling in the sky and the splatter of rain against the pavement. Just as she turned a corner, she spotted a frail old woman sitting on a torn blanket beneath a shop's awning. The woman's grey hair clung to her wet face, and her clothes were patched and tattered. People passed by without a second glance. Some even stepped away, as if avoiding a curse. Emma hesitated. She had barely enough money to survive, but she couldn't ignore the sight before her. She took a deep breath and walked up to the old woman. Are you all right?" she asked gently. The woman lifted her tired eyes to Emma, surprised by the kindness in her voice. I am just cold, child," she whispered, her voice shaky. Emma knelt beside her. "Come with me. I don't have much, but I can give you something warm to eat and a dry place to stay for the night." The old woman's lips trembled, and for a moment, she seemed lost in thought. Then, she nodded slowly. Emma helped her to her feet, ignoring the judgmental stares of passers-by. "You shouldn't do this," a voice called behind her. It was Lisa, Emma's best friend and co-worker. She stood under an umbrella, shaking her head. "That woman is strange, Emma. People say she's cursed." Emma frowned. "She's just a helpless old lady. If we don't help each other, what's the point of life?" Lisa sighed. "You're too kind for your own good." Emma ignored her and led the woman toward her tiny room at the back of a rundown apartment building. Little did she know, this simple act of kindness would change her life forever. After giving the woman a warm bowl of soup and a blanket, Emma sat across from her. "What's your name?" she asked. "Margaret," the woman replied softly. She looked at Emma with deep, knowing eyes. "You are a rare soul, Emma. The world is cruel, yet you choose kindness." Emma smiled faintly. "Life hasn't been kind to me either. But I believe if we help others, good things will find us someday." Margaret studied her for a moment. Then, her expression turned serious. "Be careful, child. Betrayal often comes from those closest to us." Emma's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Margaret shook her head. "You will understand soon enough." Emma brushed it off as the ramblings of an old woman, but deep inside, a strange unease settled in her heart. Days passed, and Emma continued her routine. But then, disaster struck. One evening, while cleaning up at the cafe, the manager, Mr. Benson, called her into his office. His face was grim. "Emma, we have a problem," he said, folding his arms. "We caught someone stealing from the cash register, and the evidence points to you." Emma's heart stopped. "What? That's impossible. I would never." Mr. Benson sighed. "The security footage shows your locker being the only one left open near the money. I have no choice but to let you go." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. "Please, sir, I swear I didn't do it." But his mind was made up. "Pack your things." As she stepped outside, devastated, Lisa approached her. "Emma, I have to tell you something," she said hesitantly. Emma turned to her, hope flickering in her eyes. "You believe me, don't you?" Lisa bit her lip, then looked away. I'm sorry. It was me. I took the money." Emma felt like the ground had been ripped from under her. "You," she whispered. Lisa looked ashamed. "I needed the money. I never thought they'd blame you." Emma stepped back, her hands trembling. "You let me lose everything for your mistake." Lisa opened her mouth to speak, but Emma turned away, walking into the night. By the time she reached home, the landlord was waiting. "You're behind on rent, Emma. You need to leave." "But I just lost my job." "Not my problem." Emma had never felt more alone. That night, as Emma sat in the dark, tears running down her cheeks, Margaret sat beside her. "You have lost much," she said softly. Emma sniffled. "I have nothing left." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out an old, golden pendant. She placed it in Emma's hands. "You are wrong, child. You are about to gain everything." Emma looked at the pendant, confused. "What is this?" Margaret sighed. "I have watched you for a long time, Emma. You are not an ordinary girl. You are destined for something greater." Emma frowned. "What are you talking about?" Margaret's eyes darkened. "I'm not who you think I am. And neither are you." Margaret took a deep breath. "Long ago, I was a queen. My family ruled over a hidden kingdom, but we were betrayed. The royal bloodline was wiped out, except for one survivor. A child was smuggled away to protect the legacy." Emma's breath caught. "And what does that have to do with me?" Margaret smiled. "Because, child, you are that lost heir." Emma's heart pounded. "That's impossible." Margaret shook her head. "The pendant in your hands is proof. It belonged to your mother, the last true queen. I have waited for years to find you. And now, it is time for you to reclaim your place." Emma stared at the pendant, her mind spinning. The struggling waitress she had always been was a lie. But before Emma could fully process the truth, a knock came at the door. Margaret's face hardened. "They have found us." Emma's blood ran cold. "Who?" Margaret stood. "The ones who betrayed your family. They will try to kill you, just as they did before. But this time, we will not run." Emma swallowed hard. Her life had changed overnight. Would she run? Or would she fight for the destiny she never knew was hers? Emma's heart pounded as the knocking grew louder. Margaret grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the back door. "We must leave, now," the old woman whispered urgently. Emma hesitated, fear gripping her chest. "Who are they?" Margaret's eyes darkened. "The same people who murdered your parents." Before Emma could respond, the front door burst open, and two men in dark suits stormed in. Their eyes locked onto Margaret. "You should have stayed hidden, old woman," one of them sneered. Margaret's grip tightened on Emma's wrist. "Run!" Emma barely had time to react before Margaret shoved her toward the back alley. She stumbled but caught herself, sprinting as fast as she could. Behind her, she heard a struggle, Margaret fighting off the intruders. Emma wanted to go back, but a voice in her head screamed, "Keep running." As she turned a corner, she slammed into someone. Strong arms grabbed her, and she gasped. "Emma," a familiar voice said. She looked up to see Daniel, her ex-boyfriend. The man who had left her when she needed him most. "What are you doing here?" she asked, breathless. "There's no time to explain," Daniel said. "Come with me." Emma hesitated. Could she trust him? Before she could decide, gunshots echoed from her apartment. Her blood ran cold. "Margaret! I have to go back!" Emma cried. Daniel pulled her into his car. "If you go back now, they'll kill you too." Tears stung Emma's eyes. But deep inside, she knew he was right. As Daniel sped away, Emma's hands clenched into fists. She had lost too much already. She wouldn't lose herself, too. Daniel drove in silence, his face unreadable. Emma finally spoke. "How do you know what's happening?" Daniel sighed. "I've known for a while, Emma. About you. About Margaret." Her eyes widened. "You knew who I was?" He nodded. "My father worked for the royal family before the betrayal. When I found out you were the lost heir, I tried to stay away to protect you. But I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore." Emma's mind spun. Why didn't Margaret tell me any of this sooner? "She was waiting," Daniel said. "Waiting to see if you had the heart of a queen." Emma swallowed hard. The words felt heavy. "If I'm really royalty, why am I running?" she muttered. Daniel glanced at her. "Good question." Daniel took Emma to a safe house outside the city. It was an old mansion, hidden behind towering trees. Inside, a group of people stood waiting. Some were older, others younger, but all had the same determined look in their eyes. One of them, a middle-aged man named Richard, stepped forward. "We've been waiting for you, Your Highness," he said, bowing slightly. Emma shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not a queen." Richard smiled. "Not yet." They explained everything. The traitors who overthrew her family still held power. Margaret had been working in secret, gathering loyalists for years. She had planned for Emma to rise when the time was right. But now, with Margaret missing, or worse, Emma had to make a choice. Hide forever, or fight for what was hers. She clenched her fists. "I'm done running," she said. Over the next few weeks, Emma trained. She learned self-defense, studied the history of her family, and prepared for the battle ahead. The plan was simple: expose the truth. Take back the throne. But nothing ever goes as planned. On the night of their attack, they received a shocking message. A video played on the projector. It showed Margaret, tied to a chair, bruised but alive. A cold voice spoke. "Surrender now, or she dies." Emma's heart clenched. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about saving the woman who had saved her. Emma stormed into the enemy's estate with Daniel and the loyalists. The air was thick with tension. Waiting for her was the man behind it all, Charles Langley, the one who had orchestrated her family's downfall. He smirked. "You finally show yourself." Emma's voice was steady. "Let Margaret go." Charles chuckled. "You're not in a position to make demands." Emma took a deep breath. Then, she threw something at his feet. A recording device. It played his own confession. His crimes. His lies. The room erupted in chaos. The truth was out. His men hesitated. Some even turned against him. Daniel moved quickly, freeing Margaret. And then, with one final command, Emma took back her throne. Weeks later, Emma stood before the people, no longer a waitress struggling to survive. She was Queen Emma. Margaret stood beside her, smiling proudly. "I never thanked you," Emma said softly. Margaret chuckled. "No, my dear. It is I who should thank you. You proved that kindness is the true mark of a queen." Emma took a deep breath, looking over the city that had once ignored her. She had been nothing. Now, she was everything. And she would rule with the heart of the girl who had once helped an old woman in the rain. The girl who never knew that kindness would change her fate forever. Please don't forget to subscribe to get more interesting stories like this.